The afternoon sun was blazing down on the old asphalt outside the community center. It was that kind of heat that makes the air shimmer above the ground, sticking to your skin the moment you step outside. The building itself looked like it had seen better days. The paint on the brick walls was chipping away, showing the gray concrete underneath. The big metal sign out front, which usually announced game times, had rusted spots on it, and the letters had faded from a bright red to a dull pink. Inside the center, though, it was a different world. It was noisy, it was chaotic, but it was alive. The air smelled like old floor wax, a little bit of sweat, and the rubber from the sneakers squeaking on the basketball court. This place wasn't just a gym. It was the living room for dozens of kids who had nowhere else to go after school let out. For many of them, walking through the side gate of this center was the best part of their day. It meant safety, it meant friends, and it meant there were adults around who actually cared what happened to them. Keanu Reeves walked through the open side gate. He didn't have a security team with him, and he wasn't wearing a suit that screamed money or Hollywood. He had on a simple gray jacket, a pair of dark pants, and a baseball cap pulled down low over his eyes. He kept his hands stuffed deep into his pockets as he walked. He looked like any other visitor stopping by to see what the noise was about. No one rushing by with a basketball or chasing a friend gave him a second look. They were too busy playing. He stopped just inside the main double doors, leaning his shoulder against the cool, painted metal frame. He stood there for a long time just watching. He didn't interrupt anyone. He didn't wave. He just observed the scene in front of him. To his left, a group of younger kids were playing a frantic game of tag, weaving their way in and out of the plastic chairs that were set up for parents. Their laughter was loud and pure. It echoed off the high ceiling, bouncing around the room like energy. Keanu's eyes followed the sound of a loud bang coming from the far end of the court. Down there near the basketball hoop, trouble was brewing. The hoop itself looked like it was tired. The backboard was wobbling, and the rim was bent slightly to the right, making every shot an adventure. A group of teenagers was gathered around it. One tall boy, maybe about 16 years old, was standing on a stepladder that was way too short for the job. He was holding a heavy wrench, trying to tighten a bolt that had been loose for months. "Turn it left, Mike. No, the other left." Another boy shouted from the ground, shielding his eyes from the overhead lights. "It's stuck," the boy on the ladder grunted, his face turning red with effort. He yanked on the wrench, but the bolt wouldn't budge. The whole backboard shook violently with every pull. Keanu watched the struggle with a small, thoughtful frown. He saw the frustration on the boys' faces. They weren't just fixing a basketball hoop, they were trying to save their game. They knew that if this hoop broke, there was no money to replace it. There was no fund for a new backboard. If it came down, it stayed down. The boy on the ladder gave one final, angry tug, lost his footing, and stumbled. He caught himself before he fell, throwing the wrench onto the padded mat below in anger. "This piece of junk," he yelled, kicking at the base of the pole. "It's never gonna stay up." The mood on the court shifted instantly. The other boys stopped bouncing their balls. The laughter from the younger kids seemed to fade away for a second. The hopelessness in the boy's voice was something everyone in that room recognized. It was the feeling of fighting against something that is just too big to fix by yourself. It was a feeling that went way beyond basketball. Keanu pushed himself off the door frame. He didn't walk over to them immediately. He knew that if a stranger, especially a famous one, walked in and tried to take over, it might feel like pity. Pity doesn't help anyone feel better. So he just walked slowly along the sideline, his hands still in his pockets, looking at the walls. The walls told the story of the place. They were lined with old photos in cheap frames. He stopped to look at one. It was a black and white picture of a team from the 80s. The kids in the photo were wearing shorts that were way too short and jerseys that looked like potato sacks, but they were smiling huge smiles. They were holding a trophy that looked like it was made of tin. Next to that photo was a newspaper clipping, yellow with age, about a car wash the center had held to buy new volleyballs. He moved further down the wall. There were photos of kids who were now grown up, some with families of their own. But as he got closer to the present day, the frames became fewer. The wall wasn't being updated as much. It wasn't because there weren't any wins or any good players. It was because the staff was too busy trying to keep the lights on to worry about framing pictures. The paint on the bottom half of the wall was scraped away where chairs had been dragged over it for years. The floor tiles near the water fountain were cracked, revealing the concrete underneath. This was a place that was holding on by a thread. You could feel it in the humidity of the room, in the flickering fluorescent light that buzzed overhead like an angry insect. But despite all the broken things, the cracked tiles, the bent hoop, the peeling paint, the spirit inside the walls was strong. It was stubborn. These kids were here because they wanted to be, because the adults who ran this place made them feel like they were champions, even when they were playing with a broken hoop. From across the room, a man in a faded blue polo shirt walked out of an office. This was the director. He looked tired. He had deep lines etched into his forehead and circles under his eyes that looked like bruises. He was carrying a stack of papers that were yellowing at the edges, bills, notices, and letters. He stopped when he saw the teenagers by the hoop, rubbing his temples with his free hand. He looked like he wanted to go help them, but he also looked like he didn't have the energy to fight with a rusty bolt today. Keanu watched the director. He saw the weight the man was carrying. It was the weight of responsibility. It wasn't just about a building. It was about the fact that if this place closed its doors, those kids would go back to empty apartments or street corners where nobody was watching out for them. The actor took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He had read the emails. He had seen the numbers on a spreadsheet, but seeing it in person was different. The spreadsheet said, "Rent overdue." The reality was a leaky roof and a flickering light. The spreadsheet said, "Equipment needs repair." The reality was a frustrated teenager throwing a wrench on the floor because the world felt unfair. Keanu started walking toward the director's office. He didn't march, he didn't act like he owned the place. He moved with a quiet calmness. As he walked past a group of little girls sitting on the floor braiding each other's hair, one of them looked up. She didn't scream. She just looked at him with wide, curious eyes, sensing that he was someone important but not sure why. He offered her a soft, genuine smile and a small nod before continuing on. He wasn't here to be a celebrity. He wasn't here to sign autographs. He was here because he knew that sometimes the most important thing you can do is just show up. He was here to find out if money could really fix a problem that went so much deeper than dollars and cents. As he reached the office doorway, the director looked up, startled. The surprise on the man's face was clear. He recognized the visitor immediately, of course, but he looked confused. It wasn't fear or excitement, it was just pure confusion. Why would someone from Keanu's world be standing in this worn-out, humid gym in the middle of the afternoon? Keanu stopped a few feet away. He didn't offer his hand to shake. He didn't introduce himself with a big, fancy greeting. He just stood there, looking past the director into the cluttered little office, then back out at the court where the boy was still kicking at the basketball pole in frustration. The noise of the gym, the squeaks, the shouts, the bouncing balls, seemed to fade into the background for a moment. "I like what you've done with the place," Keanu said finally. His voice was low and soft, barely rising above the noise of the room. It wasn't a joke, he meant it. He meant the way the kids felt safe. He meant the way the walls held memories. He meant the stubborn refusal of this place to give up, even when it was falling apart. The director blinked, processing the compliment in the middle of all the chaos. He looked down at the stack of bills in his hand, then back at the famous actor standing before him. "It's a mess," the director said, letting out a long, tired breath. "But it's our mess," Keanu nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "I can see that." He took his hands out of his pockets and leaned against the doorframe, looking ready to listen. "Tell me about the mess." The director looked at the man standing in his doorway, still trying to process that this was actually happening. He waved a hand toward a plastic chair that sat in front of his cluttered desk. It was one of those cheap chairs you find at a discount store, the kind that feels too flimsy to hold an adult, let alone a movie star. The chair had a small crack in the seat, and someone had written a phone number on the arm in black permanent ink years ago. "Please sit," the director said. His voice sounded rough, like he had been shouting over the noise of the gym all day, even though he had mostly been whispering over numbers. Keanu didn't hesitate. He walked over and sat down. The chair groaned under his weight, a loud plastic creak that seemed to echo in the small office. He didn't seem to mind the discomfort or the shabbiness of it. He just leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, clasping his hands together. His body language said that he was there to listen, really listen, not just to be polite. The office was barely big enough for the desk and 2 chairs. Every inch of wall space was covered. There were no degrees from fancy universities hanging in frames. Instead, there were handwritten notes from kids, drawings of basketballs and hearts, and flyers for car washes that had happened 10 years ago. The desk itself was a mountain of paper. Stacks of manila folders teetered dangerously like a game of Jenga. There were unpaid bills marked with red, past due stamps, envelopes that had been torn open and resealed, and estimated quotes for repairs that made the director's stomach hurt every time he looked at them. The director walked around the desk and sat in his own chair, which squeaked just as much as the visitors. He looked tired. Not just "I need a nap" tired, but a deep, bone-tired feeling that comes from worrying about other people's children for years on end. He ran a hand through his hair, which was thinning on top and gray at the temples. "I didn't expect you to come," the director admitted. "Not personally. I thought an assistant would drop off a check or maybe an email. I wanted to see it," Keanu said simply. He looked around the small room, his eyes landing on a framed photo of a basketball team standing in front of a very old, beat-up bus. "I wanted to see where the money goes." "It matters." The director nodded and took a deep breath. He didn't know where to start, so he just started with the biggest problem. He pulled a piece of paper from the top of a stack. It was a notice from the landlord. "The rent," the director said, sliding the paper across the desk. "It's going up. Again, it's doubling next month. The owner says the property value in the area is going up. He wants to sell the building to a developer who wants to turn it into condos or a coffee shop." He pointed out the window, where the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky. "This land is worth a lot more than this old gym." Keanu picked up the paper. He read it slowly. He didn't frown or look shocked. He just read the numbers, absorbing the reality of them. The numbers were brutal. The rent was more than the center made in 3 months of fundraising. "What about the heating?" Keanu asked, putting the paper down gently. He pointed toward the ceiling. "I can see the water stains. The roof is leaking, isn't it?" The director let out a short, dry laugh. "You have good eyes. Yes, the roof is leaking. Has been for 2 years. We patch it with tar when it rains, but it's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. And the heater, it works on Tuesdays sometimes. If you kick it hard enough." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Last winter we practiced in our coats. I couldn't send the kids home, though. Their apartments are colder than this place." He went on, listing the problems like he was reading a grocery list of misery. The electricity bill was overdue because the old lights in the gym used so much power. The plumbing in the bathrooms was backing up again. The van they used to pick up the kids from the rougher neighborhoods had broken down 3 times last month, and they didn't have the money to fix the transmission. "We try to fundraise," the director said, his voice cracking a little. "We sell candy bars, we wash cars. The parents help, but most of them are working 2 jobs just to put food on the table. They don't have extra cash to give." He looked down at his desk, defeated. "I'm not a businessman, I'm just a guy who knows how to coach basketball, but the numbers are winning." Keanu sat in silence for a moment. He looked at the director's hands, rough, calloused hands that had probably taped 1,000 ankles and tied 1,000 shoes. He looked at the drawing taped to the computer monitor, a childish crayon picture of a trophy that said, "Thanks, coach." "Tell me the number," Keanu said quietly. "What does it cost to fix it? Not just for this month. What does it cost to buy you time? To fix the roof, the heater, and pay off the rent so you don't have to worry about it for a long time?" The director looked up. He hesitated. It felt strange to say the number out loud. It was a number so big it felt imaginary to him, like counting the stars. It was a number that represented freedom, but also a number that felt impossible. The director started, then stopped. He cleared his throat. "To clear the debt, fix the roof and the heating, and pay the lease for 5 years, it's about $250,000. The room went silent. The noise from the gym seemed to vanish. The director stared at the surface of his desk, feeling ashamed, saying it made it real. It highlighted how close he was to losing everything. He waited for Keanu to react. He expected a gasp or a look of pity or maybe a polite, "I'll see what I can do." Instead, he heard the sound of a zipper. Keanu reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a checkbook. It wasn't a fancy leather-bound one, just a simple blue checkbook with a pen stuck in the spiral. He unclipped the pen and rested the checkbook on his knee. 250,000, Keanu repeated, his voice steady. He didn't blink. He didn't look like he was thinking about it. He acted like he was just ordering a sandwich. That covers everything. The kids can play without coats next winter. The van gets fixed. The director nodded, his mouth slightly open. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Yes, that would cover all of it. We could breathe again. Keanu nodded, too. He pressed the checkbook against his leg and started to write. The sound of the pen scratching the paper was the loudest thing in the room. He wrote slowly and carefully. He didn't cross anything out. He didn't hesitate. He wrote the amount with a precision that made the director's heart hammer against his ribs. It was a surreal moment. Here was a man who the world saw on giant screens in movies, fighting bad guys and saving the universe, sitting in a rickety plastic chair in a dusty office. Doing the most heroic thing he could possibly do, saving a small, gritty gym for a bunch of kids he didn't know. Keanu tore the check out of the book. He held it for a second, looking at it, making sure everything was correct. Then he leaned forward and placed it on the desk, right on top of the stack of unpaid bills. "Here," Keanu said softly. He didn't make a big speech. He didn't ask for a plaque on the wall with his name on it. This should take care of the numbers. The director stared at the piece of paper. It was crisp and white, standing out starkly against the yellowing bills and the cluttered mess of his desk. It looked like a lifeline. He picked it up with shaking hands. The zeros at the end of the number seemed to go on forever. It was more money than the center had seen in its entire history. I don't know what to say," the director stammered. He felt a lump in his throat the size of a basketball. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough. The kids. You don't know what this means." Keanu leaned back in the chair, a small, gentle smile touching his lips. "Just make sure they keep playing," he said. "Make sure they have a place to go." For a moment, the director felt a wave of pure relief wash over him. The weight that had been crushing his shoulders for years suddenly lifted. He thought about the roof. He thought about the heater. He thought about the van. He thought about how he could sleep tonight without worrying about the landlord calling. It felt like a miracle. It was the end of the nightmare. But as he held the check, looking at the signature at the bottom, something else started to creep into his mind. It was a small, nagging feeling. He looked at Keanu, who was sitting calmly, waiting for him to put the check away. The director looked out the window, where the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the court. He saw the teenage boy who had been struggling with the hoop earlier. The boy had sat down on the bleachers now, his head in his hands. He looked lonely even though he was surrounded by people. The director looked back at the check in his hand. It was an incredible gift. It would fix the building, it would pay the bills, it would keep the doors open. But as he looked at the boy on the bleachers, he realized something painful. Money fixes walls and roofs, but it doesn't fix the feeling of being abandoned. A check keeps the lights on, but it doesn't teach a kid how to trust people again. It buys a new van, but it doesn't give a kid a father figure to look up to. The director tightened his grip on the check. He knew he couldn't just cash it and walk away. He couldn't just be the manager of a building. If he took this money, he had to make sure it was used for more than just bricks and mortar. He had to make sure that the kids felt the spirit behind the money, not just the benefit of it. He looked at Keanu, his eyes suddenly serious. The relief was there, but underneath it was a new resolve. He needed to tell Keanu something important, something about the nature of the problem that money couldn't solve. "Mr. Reeves," the director said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I can't take this yet." Keanu paused, his hand hovering just over the check resting on the desk. He looked up, confused. The air in the small office felt heavy and still. Outside, the sounds of the gym, sneakers squeaking, balls bouncing, the distant echo of a whistle, seemed to fade away, leaving just the two men in the quiet clutter of the room. "I'm sorry," Keanu asked softly. He didn't sound offended, he just sounded genuinely puzzled. "I thought this was what you needed. You said the rent is doubling. You said the roof is leaking." The director looked at the check again. It was a beautiful piece of paper. It represented safety. It represented that he wouldn't have to lay off any of his part-time staff. It meant the lights would stay on. But he couldn't pick it up. His hand stayed in his lap. "It is exactly what we need," the director said, his voice shaking a little. For the building, it saves the walls, it saves the floor. But he trailed off, looking past Keanu, toward the window where the last of the daylight was turning the sky a deep purple. He stood up slowly. His knees cracked, a reminder of all the years he had spent standing on sidelines. He walked over to a gray metal filing cabinet that was jammed into the corner of the office. It was dented on one side, likely from a hockey bag or a clumsy teenager. He pulled open the top drawer. It stuck for a second, then popped open with a screech of metal. The director didn't take out a file. He took out a handful of crumpled papers and a simple notebook with a torn cover. He walked back to the desk and dropped them on top of the check, burying the signature under a pile of scribbles. "What is this?" Keanu asked. He leaned forward, looking at the mess of paper. "These are notes," the director said. "Letters the kids wrote, things they told me." He picked up a sheet of lined paper torn from a school notebook. The handwriting was messy, big letters that pressed hard into the paper, almost tearing it in some places. "This one is from a boy named Ty," the director said, his voice low. "He's 12. His dad has been in prison for 3 years. Ty wrote this last week when we had a lock-in." The director cleared his throat and read aloud. "I feel like a ghost. Nobody sees me at school. I just walk through the halls, but here I play, but I'm scared that when I grow up I'm going to disappear too." The director put the paper down gently. Keanu stared at it, his face unreadable, but his eyes were focused intensely on the childish scrawl. The director picked up another one. This was a note card with a smiley face drawn on the corner. "This is from Layla. She's 9. Her mom works 3 jobs. Layla comes here every day at 4 o'clock and stays until 9 at night because there is no one home to let her in. She wrote, 'I wish the doors would never lock. I wish I could sleep here.'" The director looked at Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, if I cash this check, I pay the landlord. The landlord is happy. The bank is happy, but does it help Layla feel less alone? Does it help Ty stop feeling like a ghost?" Keanu sat back in the plastic chair. It squeaked under his shifting weight. He rubbed his chin, thinking. He looked from the papers to the check and then back to the papers. "Money solves the problems of the physical world," Keanu said slowly. "It fixes the roof. It buys the food." "It does," the director agreed, "but look at this place. Look at what we actually do." The director walked over to the wall and pointed to a picture that was hanging slightly crooked. It was a group of kids, not posing, just sitting on the bleachers eating pizza. They looked messy. They looked tired, but they were leaning on each other. "We aren't just a gym," the director said, turning back to face the actor. "We are a place where these kids learn how to be people. They come from homes where there is screaming or where there is silence because nobody is there. They come here and we teach them how to shake hands. We teach them how to look someone in the eye. We teach them that if they drop a ball, they pick it up and try again." He took a deep breath. The frustration he had been feeling for months was bubbling up, not at Keanu, but at the situation. "If you give me this check and I just pay the bills, nothing changes for their hearts," the director said passionately. "I have had people donate money before, big companies. They give us a check, they take a picture for the newspaper, and they leave. The money runs out and the problems come back, because money doesn't stick around. Money doesn't care." The director sat down on the edge of his desk, right next to the check. He looked Keanu in the eye. He needed him to understand. "These kids have been let down by adults their whole lives," the director said. "Their parents let them down, the system let them down, and people who promise to help and then disappear let them down. If you give me this money and then you walk away, you become another person who disappeared. You become a transaction." Keanu was silent for a long time. He looked at the handwritten note from the boy who felt like a ghost. He picked it up carefully, handling it like it was fragile. He read the words again to himself. "I didn't want to be a transaction," Keanu said, looking up. "I just wanted to help." "I know," the director said, his voice softening. "And I am grateful, believe me, I am. But I can't take this if it's just to keep the lights on. I can't take it if it's just charity." The director stood up and walked to the window. It was dark now. The streetlights outside had flickered on, casting long shadows across the parking lot. He saw a young girl sitting on the bench outside the front doors, waiting for a ride that was likely running late. "Charity is a cold word," the director said, his back to Keanu. "It means you have and they have not. It puts a wall between you and them. I don't want a wall. I want them to know they are worth the effort, not just your money, your effort. He turned around. What changes everything isn't the check. It's the connection. It's knowing that someone powerful, someone who doesn't have asterisk to care, actually cares enough to stay, to show up, to look them in the eye. Keanu looked down at the checkbook still on his knee. He looked at the pen. He thought about the boy on the ladder earlier, frustrated and kicking the pole. He thought about the boy feeling like a ghost. A check would fix the pole, but it wouldn't fix the frustration inside the boy. Keanu slowly closed the checkbook. He tucked it back into his jacket pocket. The sound of the zipper closing seemed loud in the quiet office. The director felt a pang of panic. Had he messed up? Had he been too proud? He needed that money, but he couldn't betray the kid's trust. I understand, Keanu said quietly. He stood up. He was taller than the director expected, but he didn't tower over him. He stood on the same level. You don't want a donor, you want a partner. The director let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Yes, he whispered. That's it exactly. Keanu looked around the office again, but this time he wasn't looking at the mess. He was looking at the heart of the place. He saw the drawings, the photos, the worn-out carpet. He saw that the value of this place wasn't in the real estate. It was in the trust built between the director and those kids. Money could buy a gym, but it couldn't buy what was happening in this room. I can do that, Keanu said. I can be a partner. He walked to the door of the office. He stopped with his hand on the metal frame, looking out at the gym floor. The night janitor had started sweeping the floor, moving in slow, rhythmic arcs. The kids were drifting away, heading home into the dark. I'm not going to write a check and disappear, Keanu said, turning back to look at the director. I'm going to come back. I'm going to help you fix that hoop. I'm going to help you sweep the floors. I'm going to be here. He looked at the director with a seriousness that made the director's heart skip a beat. You were right, Keanu said. A check pays the bills, but it doesn't buy them a family. We need to give them a family, or at least make sure they know they are part of one. The director smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his tired eyes. He looked at the empty spot on his desk where the check had been. It felt strange to turn down a fortune, but it felt right to hold on to his dignity. Just promise me one thing, the director said. What's that? Keanu raised an eyebrow, waiting. Next time, the director said, pointing a finger at him, don't wear the nice jacket, it's going to get dusty. Keanu looked down at his jacket and chuckled. It was a real human sound. Deal, he said. With that, Keanu walked out of the office. He didn't leave like a celebrity rushing to a limousine. He walked out like he was coming back. He stepped onto the gym floor, the soles of his shoes making a soft thud on the wood. The director watched from the doorway, watching the actor walk into the swarm of kids, ready to do the real work. The silence that followed Keanu's departure from the office was heavy. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when the air feels clean and new. The director stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the actor walk away. He saw him stop near the bleachers, crouching down to talk to the little girl who was still waiting for her ride. The director looked down at his desk. The spot where the check had been was empty. In its place were the handwritten letters, the messy, desperate, honest words of the kids he loved. For a second, a sharp pang of anxiety shot through his chest. He had just turned away a fortune. He had told one of the richest men in the world that his money wasn't good enough. The logical side of his brain screamed at him. You are an idiot asterisk, he thought. You could have fixed the roof. You could have paid the rent for 5 years. What if he never comes back? What if you just blew the only chance you had? He looked back out at the gym floor. The reality of the situation hadn't changed. The lights were still flickering. The paint was still peeling. The rent notice was still sitting in the to-do pile. He had gambled everything on a feeling, on the hope that this man was different. It was a terrifying gamble. Keanu was now kneeling on the floor, tying the shoelace of a young boy who had tripped near the water fountain. He didn't do it quickly or efficiently. He took his time, making a double knot so it wouldn't come undone. The boy was looking at him with wide eyes, unsure if this was real life or a dream. When Keanu finished, he didn't ruffle the boy's hair or make a big deal of it. He just stood up, gave a small nod, and kept walking. The director sighed and leaned against the metal doorframe. He realized that his fear was based on an old way of thinking. He was used to people treating problems like transactions. You pay money, you get a service. But Keanu had understood something deeper when he put that checkbook away. He understood that the director wasn't asking for a handout. He was asking for a relationship. Out on the floor, Keanu had made his way to the group of teenagers who were still sulking near the broken hoop. The tall boy who had been throwing the wrench earlier was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, texting furiously on his phone. He looked angry at the world. Keanu didn't approach him from the front. He walked over and sat down on the floor next to him. Not above him, but with asterisk him. The director couldn't hear what was being said over the noise of the janitor's broom, but he watched the body language. The boy stiffened at first, probably recognizing the famous face, maybe feeling defensive. But Keanu just sat there, legs stretched out, looking at the bent rim of the basketball hoop. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking at a watch. He was just sharing space. After a few minutes, the boy put his phone in his pocket. He said something. Keanu nodded. Then Keanu pointed at the rim, and they started talking. It wasn't a lecture. It looked like two guys talking about the mechanics of a broken piece of metal. The director felt a lump form in his throat. This was what he meant. If Keanu had just written a check, the director would have hired a repairman to come fix the hoop during the day while the kids were at school. The kids would have come back, seen it was fixed, and maybe said, "Cool." That would have been the end of it, but this was different. By sitting on the floor, by sharing the frustration, Keanu was turning a broken hoop into a shared project. He was showing the boy that his anger was valid, but that he didn't have to deal with it alone. The director pushed himself off the doorframe and walked over to the filing cabinet. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick, dusty binder labeled Maintenance Log. For years, this binder had been a source of stress. It was a list of everything that was wrong with the building, a list that grew faster than he could cross things off. He opened the binder to a blank page in the back. He picked up a pen. At the top of the page, he wrote the date. Then under Project, he wrote, Basketball Hoop Court B * under Status, he wrote, in progress. He looked at the page. Usually he would write pending funds or waiting for quote. But in progress felt different. It felt active. It felt like something was actually happening. He walked out of the office and onto the court. The air was cooler now that the sun had gone down, and the gym felt vast and equi. He walked over to the bleachers where a few younger kids were still hanging around, waiting for their parents. They looked up at him nervously as he approached. "Hey," the director said softly. "Don't worry, we're not closing yet. We thought you were kicking us out," one little girl said, clutching her backpack straps. "No," the director said, smiling. "I was just having a meeting. A very important meeting." He looked over at Keanu and the teenage boy. They were now standing up, walking over to the equipment closet to look for tools. The boy was actually smiling a little bit, a crooked, reluctant smile, but a smile nonetheless. "Is he staying?" a little boy asked, pointing at Keanu. The director knelt down so he was eye level with the kids. "I think so," he said. "Not just for today, but he's not staying as a boss. He's staying to help." "What's he gonna do?" the little girl asked. "Is he gonna act?" "He's gonna work," the director said. "He's gonna get his hands dirty." Just like us, the kids seemed to like that idea. To them, movie stars were people who lived in glass houses and never touched dirt. The idea that this famous person would come to their messy, loud, imperfect world made him feel more real to them. It made them feel like their world was worth visiting. The director stood up and walked toward the equipment closet. As he got closer, he could hear Keanu asking the teenager about the specific size of the wrench they needed. The boy was explaining it with expertise, his voice confident. "So you need a 1/2-inch drive socket, maybe an extension because the bolt is way up in the bracket," the boy was saying. "1/2-inch drive extension," Keanu repeated like he was memorizing lines for a movie. "Got it." The director leaned against the doorjamb of the closet. Keanu looked up and flashed a quick smile. "I'm getting educated," Keanu said. "Turns out fixing hoops is complicated." "It is," the director said. "But you have a good teacher." Keanu looked at the boy, whose chest seemed to puff up a little bit at the compliment. "Yeah," Keanu agreed. "The best." The director realized then that the plan was already working. The dynamic in the room had shifted. Before, the director was the old guy trying to hold everything together, and the kids were the chaotic elements he had to manage. Now, there was a new energy. Keanu wasn't an authority figure. He was a bridge. He was the cool uncle who shows up and makes everyone feel like things are going to be okay. So, Keanu said, turning back to the director, about the renovation. I was thinking, the director waited. I don't want to just write a check to a contractor to come in and do everything while the kids are at school, Keanu said. That feels like we're hiding the work. I want the kids to help. I want to teach them how to paint the walls. I want to teach them how to fix the leaks. If we fix the roof, let's have them up there handing us the nails. The director's eyes widened. It would take 3 times as long. It would be a disaster. It would be messy. And it was the best idea he had ever heard. Teach them how to fix their own house, the director whispered. It was brilliant. It wasn't just giving them a place to play, it was giving them ownership. It was teaching them that if something breaks, they have the power to fix it. It was the ultimate lesson in resilience. Exactly, Keanu said. We turn the renovation into a project. A team effort. The director looked around the gym. In his mind, he could see it. He could see the kids holding paintbrushes, maybe getting more paint on the floor than the walls, but laughing. He could see them learning how to use a drill, how to sand down wood. He could see them taking pride in the scuff marks because they would know exactly how they got there. We're going to need a lot of drop cloths, the director said, a grin spreading across his face. I'll buy the drop cloths, Keanu said, and the paint and the tools, but I'm not buying the labor. That part is on us. The teenage boy who was listening to all of this crossed his arms. So we gotta work, he asked, feigning annoyance. I thought you were just gonna pay someone to do it. Keanu looked at him, deadpan. I could do that, but then you wouldn't get the satisfaction of telling your friends you fixed this place yourself. Plus, he added, pointing to the boy's arms, you look like you could use a workout. Painting walls is harder than it looks. The boy rolled his eyes, but he was smiling now. Fine. But I'm not painting the bathrooms, that's gross. Deal, Keanu said. I'll paint the bathrooms. The director laughed out loud, he couldn't help it. The tension of the day, the years of worry, the crushing weight of the debt, it all bubbled up and out of him in a laugh. It felt good. He looked at Keanu, this movie star who was standing in a dusty closet holding a rusty wrench, promising to paint toilets. It didn't make sense on paper. It wasn't a good business deal. But as the echo of his laughter faded away, replaced by the sounds of the kids starting to pack up their bags, the director knew that he had made the right choice. The money was coming, yes. But more importantly, the help was here, the real help. The kind that doesn't sign a check and walk away, but the kind that rolls up its sleeves and says, let's get to work. All right, the director said, clapping his hands together. It's getting late. Everyone out, we have a big day tomorrow. We have a lot of planning to do. The kids groaned good-naturedly and started heading for the exit. As they walked past Keanu, they didn't scream for autographs. They just waved or bumped fists or gave him a chin-up nod. He was one of them now, or at least he was on their team. Keanu hung the wrench back on the pegboard, lining it up perfectly with the others. He turned to the director. I'll be back tomorrow, he said, around 10. I'll bring coffee. Bring donuts, the director said. The teenagers eat a lot. Donuts, Keanu nodded. Got it. He walked toward the exit, the same way he came in, hands in his pockets, head down. But as he pushed through the metal gate and out into the night, the director noticed a spring in his step. The man wasn't walking away from a problem. He was walking toward a solution. The director stood alone in the center of the basketball court. The lights flickered once, twice, and then stayed steady. He looked at the broken hoop. It was still bent, it was still rusty. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't look like a lost cause. It looked like a project. It looked like the beginning of something new. 3 months passed faster than the director could have ever imagined. The days were a blur of activity, noise, and the smell of fresh paint. The transformation of the community center wasn't just visible on the walls. It was in the air. The heavy, musty smell of old dust and damp concrete was gone. In its place was the crisp scent of newly varnished wood, latex paint, and the unmistakable aroma of buttery popcorn popping in the corner machine. The grand reopening wasn't the kind of event you see on television news. There were no red velvet ropes blocking off the entrance, and there were no security guards in black suits holding back crowds. There were no flashing cameras from the paparazzi, and there was no press conference with a podium covered in microphones. Instead, It was a Tuesday afternoon. The big metal doors were propped wide open to let the autumn breeze blow through. The outside world could see in, and the kids inside could see out. There was no wall between them anymore. The director stood near the entrance, wearing a clean t-shirt that actually fit him. He looked around the gym with a sense of disbelief. The floor, once scuffed and dull, now gleamed under the glare of bright, new LED lights. The lights didn't flicker or buzz with that annoying, angry sound anymore. They shone with a steady, warm hum that made the whole place feel welcoming. The walls, once a depressing shade of grayish-green, were now painted a bright, energetic blue with white trim. It looked professional, it looked cared for, but what made the director smile wasn't the paint, it was the noise. It was the sound of 100 sneakers squeaking on a brand-new court surface. It was the sound of whistles blowing and coaches shouting encouragement with a volume that came from joy, not desperation. Near the concession stand, which had been renovated with a shiny new counter and a working refrigerator, Keanu Reeves was busy. He wasn't standing there waving to people. He was wearing a simple beige apron over his clothes, his sleeves rolled up past his elbows. He was grabbing stacks of paper cups and filling them with ice-cold water. A line of kids had formed, sweaty from playing pickup games. They weren't shy about rushing him. They weren't treating him like a celebrity. They were treating him like the guy who controlled the water supply. "Hey, can I get two? One for my brother," a young boy shouted, holding up 3 fingers. Keanu didn't miss a beat. He filled 2 cups, handed them over with a smile, and didn't even ask why the boy held up 3 fingers. "Don't spill it," he joked. "That floor took us 3 weeks to finish." "I won't," the boy yelled, running back toward the court. The director watched the interaction closely. In the beginning, he worried that having a movie star around would be a distraction. He thought the kids would just stare, or that Keanu would act like he was doing everyone a favor by being there. But that never happened. Keanu had kept his promise. He showed up every week, sometimes more often. He painted the bathrooms just like he said he would. He helped assemble the new bleachers. He spent an entire afternoon trying to fix the soda machine until a repairman finally had to be called. Keanu became part of the background noise of the place, in the best way possible. He was just Keanu. He was the guy who would pass you the ball if you were open, and the guy who would make you laugh if you missed a shot. The director walked over to the court, where a group of teenagers was sitting on the sidelines. These were the same kids who used to sit with their heads in their hands, looking angry or hopeless. Today, they were laughing, wearing new jerseys that actually had matching numbers. The boy who had struggled with the broken hoop months ago, the one who wanted to quit, was wearing a jersey with the word "Captain" stitched across the front. He was lacing up a pair of brand-new basketball shoes. He looked up and saw the director walking by. "Hey, coach," the boy said. The respect in his voice was real. "Are we starting the tournament soon?" "As soon as everyone finishes their water," the director said. "How's the ankle?" "Good," the boy said, bouncing on his toes to prove it. "Keanu showed me how to tape it up so it doesn't hurt. He said he does it for his stunts." The director smiled. "Did he?" "Well, he knows what he's talking about." It was these small moments that mattered. The advice, the attention, the feeling that someone important was listening to them. The money had bought the shoes and the jerseys, sure, but the connection gave them the confidence to wear them with pride. As the afternoon went on, the gym started to fill up with parents. They came in from work, still in their uniforms or office clothes. They looked around with wide eyes, amazed at the changes. Many of them came up to the director, shaking his hand, their eyes misty with gratitude. They knew how close this place came to closing down. One mother walked over to the director. She was holding a toddler on her hip. "I don't know how you did it," she said quietly, "but thank you. My son has a place to go after school now. He's safe here." The director looked past her to where Keanu was now leaning against the concession stand, talking to one of the volunteer coaches. "I had a lot of help," the director said. "It wasn't just me." He looked at Keanu. The actor looked tired. He had been there for 4 hours. He had been handing out water, cleaning up spills, and cheering for kids who missed easy layups. But he also looked happy. He looked more relaxed than the director had ever seen him in a movie. There was no script to follow here. He was just being himself. The director remembered that day in the office 3 months ago when he turned away the check. He remembered the terror of that moment, the fear that he had made a mistake. He realized now that he hadn't just saved the building back then. He had saved the soul of the place. If he had taken the money and just paid the bills, the center would still be open. The roof would be fixed and the heater would work, but it would still feel cold. It would feel like a facility. By forcing the partnership, by insisting that Keanu be a human and not just a bank account, he had built something stronger than concrete. He had built a community that felt seen. The game began. The whistle blew and the sharp sound cut through the noise of the crowd. The director walked to the sidelines, standing under the new basket. Keanu came and stood next to him, wiping his hands on a towel. He had finished his shift at the water station. "Good turnout," Keanu said, taking a sip from his own water bottle. "Yeah," the director agreed. "Best we've had in years." They watched the game together. The captain, the boy who had been so angry, drove down the lane and made a perfect pass to a teammate. The teammate scored, the crowd erupted. It wasn't just polite applause, it was a roar. It was the sound of pride. Keanu clapped his hands together, cheering as loud as anyone. "That kid can play," he said. "He can," the director said, "and now he has a floor to prove it." The sun began to set outside the high windows, casting a golden light across the gym. The shadows lengthened on the shiny new floor. The director looked around the room one last time. He saw the faces of the kids, faces that were usually stressed or guarded, now lit up with joy. He saw the parents relaxing, knowing their children were safe. He looked at the new equipment, the fixed lights, the fresh paint. But mostly he looked at the people. The money had fixed the things that break, but the people had fixed the things that hurt. Keanu checked his watch and sighed. "I have to run to a meeting," he said, "but I'll be back Thursday." "We still have to fix the lockers in the locker room, right?" The director laughed. "You don't have to do the lockers, Keanu. You've done enough." "I want to," Keanu said simply. He zipped up his jacket. "See you Thursday, coach. See you Thursday." Keanu walked toward the exit. He didn't make a big scene when he left. He didn't ask for everyone's attention. He just grabbed his backpack and headed for the gate. A few kids high-fived him as he walked past, but mostly they kept playing the game. They knew he would be back. That was the important part. He wasn't a guest, he was part of the team. The director stood alone in the center of the noise. The buzzer sounded to end the first quarter. The gym was alive. It was beating with a rhythm that felt steady and strong. The building was safe. The bills were paid. But more importantly, the hearts inside it were full. The director took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of popcorn and sweat and new paint. It was the best smell in the world. It was the smell of home.